Step into realms where the heart takes flight, where strategy meets the edge of night. The Dungeons, Dragons, and Psychology Podcast. Prepare your mind. Now be our guest.
Have you ever run a campaign and got to the end of it and thought to yourself that it would make an excellent novel? How would you go about doing that? Turning a story that you told into a story that others could read. Our guest today did just that. He started role-playing about 20 years ago, and during the pandemic, he took some of those stories and that experience as a role player and converted it into a fantasy series. And in today's episode, he's going to share with us some of that process. I'm Robert Walker, author of Session Zero, the DMG to writing great campaigns in any system. And this is my show where I teach collaborative storytellers how to create memorable campaigns using psychology. So let's get to the interview and meet our guest.
Hi, I'm J.V. Hilliard, and I am the author of the Warminster Series, an epic and dark fantasy series. Book 1, The Last Keeper, and Book 2, Voradin's Lair, are both on the market right now. Books 3 and 4 will come out in the holidays of 2022 and then the spring of 2023. I am also the owner of Altered Reality Magazine, which can be found at alteredrealitymag.com. And I'm about to launch a video game based on my intellectual property being licensed from the realm of Warminster.
I am very excited to have you on. I just started reading last week, The Last Keeper. I'm about halfway through the book right now. Really, really enjoying it so far.
Great.
What I find really interesting about it is it feels to me sort of like a role-playing game. I'm identifying a lot with the characters, as far as some of them have like familiar tropes that I'm used to in sort of that epic fantasy genre, especially like in the realm of tabletop role-playing game. So it does make me curious. I know you have a little bit of a background in D&D and role-playing games. I've heard you talk about it on other interviews that you've given. Can you kind of tell me a little bit about what got you into the role-playing space? And then I'm also interested to know, did those stories you had from role-playing enter into your writing?
Yeah, the answer is it did enter into my writing. In fact, I started playing role-playing games when I was in elementary school. My uncle was paralyzed in the Vietnam War, and I grew up in his bedroom. My mother was his nurse, and there were very few things that he could do in real life, except he could write, and that was a form of escapism for him. And with role-playing, it was another way that he could escape being bedridden or in a wheelchair, for part or all the remaining parts of his life. And so, I started playing at the age of 10 and I played still Sunday night, 6 to 10 every week, with
Awesome.
my friends. We're on 5th edition. We started with AD&D. So like we're old school but we're keeping up with new school. And you're right. I mean, I think that a lot of my experience as both a player and a dungeon master can be seen inside the series. The Last Keeper in particular, you'll recognize a number of what D&D would describe as classes and races. In the novel, I stayed away from anything that was related to Tolkien or Game of Thrones or, even Dungeons and Dragons. And my monsters are cryptids, and I created new things and new challenges for what I would describe in a role-playing setting as the PCs, but the main characters in the novel. And a lot of my experience as both a player and a DM is woven into the novel. I think to be a good author, you have to be a good storyteller. And I think that comes part and parcel with being a dungeon master or a game master of any kind. And I think I've honed my abilities over the years of both being a player and a DM. And, what I've done is I've kind of memorialized a number of our adventures and even some campaigns in the best way I could without making it the full story. Right. So like some of the the big bad evil guys and some of the monsters are things that are new to the stories, but the concepts behind them and the things that had happened were really adventures that I played or I dungeon mastered along with my friends and family for the last 20 years.
That is awesome. So I am curious a little bit about the selection of names for your characters. I'm curious, is Damus or is Princess Adeline, are either of them characters that have been played in any of your games or characters that you played?
No. Damus actually it comes from Nostradamus. I took the last part of Damus and just added an E to it to give it a little, and because he's a seer, I figured that was a nice little kind of creative way to work into that. But Adeline is actually an adaptation of a character named Mylea that one of my friends had dungeon mastered. And Sir Ritter of Vulcaneer is a character of mine. And in the campaign, Ritter and Mylea's characters fall in love and they get married. And it's very similar to what, Ritter faces as sort of a raven elf and a trollborn at his heart, meaning he's a muggle, right? He's of mixed blood and he's looked down upon by the Vermilion elves, which are the highest caste of elves in the novels. And that's sort of like a high elf in Dungeons and Dragons. And so Mylea became Adeline and Ritter stayed the same. I just basically adopted him and the concept behind him, where he had come from, the Long Marchers. That's all right straight out of a 2+ year long D&D campaign. And Adeline's stuff was a little bit of a twist. It was something that I had worked on in a previous D&D campaign 20 years ago when I was in college. The Vermilion elves were evil elves, right? And in this case, I made them sort of high elves and very true and honest and what I would describe in D&D terms as lawful good elves. So it was interesting making something that I did 20 years ago as Dungeon Master, twisting into something I did 2 years ago as a player and putting them together into a story arc. Yeah.
Yeah, it is really interesting. I do have to say, one scene that really stood out for me that kind of hooked my attention was in the introduction of Adeline, when she first wakes up in the camp and everyone else is still sleeping. And then she is sort of not really greeted, but there's this omen of these black unicorns that step forward, this herd of black unicorns. And the way that was all described really struck me as like, oh, wow, okay, this is going to be interesting. This feels, even though she doesn't start the story as like the seer, you have that in Damus's character, but I kind of still feel this woven thread of fate kind of going through the story that just sort of continues along. And I think that's a really powerful way to write, and I really like that about the story so far. So I just wanted to highlight that for my listeners.
Yeah, no, and I first of all, I'm glad you caught that. And in sort of gaming terms, I'm introducing the Tetrine, which is this race of black unicorns, very powerful unicorns that are tied. Adeline doesn't know this yet, but they are tied to, her race of people. And so they visited her specifically, and she learns a little bit more about that by the end of novel 1, and definitely a lot more about that in novel 2. And that kind of plays out in the final 2 novels and how they, how she reconnects with them. And so sometimes you have to pace it properly. And even though she's a Vermilion elf, she's a very young Vermilion elf and doesn't know some of the stories and even some of the histories around their religion and where these Tetrine had come from, and learns that as she moves through the story arcs. And so that's something that will definitely come back and ebb and flow through the story and then be in your face in story 3 and 4.
Awesome. Yeah, I'm looking forward to that. Let me ask you a little bit then, what took you from the process of playing games to getting into wanting to create a series and tell this very epic story?
We'll be right back.
Hey, Cyclithids, if you love the Dungeons, Dragons, and Psychology podcast and want to help keep it alive, there are a ton of ways you can support the show. Join us on Patreon for exclusive content like NPC character sheets, early access to new products, and even first looks at DM's Assistant app. You can also grab gaming-inspired merch on the Etsy shop, Games for Games, or pick up one of my books, The Player's Handbook to Real Life, or Session Zero, the DMG to Writing Great Campaigns in any system. And even if financial support isn't in the cards for you, You can still help by sharing the show, leaving reviews, or introducing new players to our community. Links are always in the show notes, and thank you for being the heart of our adventure.
COVID, as stupid as that sounds, I know that there are a lot of COVID authors out there, and like many people, my businesses were locked down during that time. And, my wife looked at me and she's like, I know you're going to be stir crazy, not doing anything. So find something to do while you're here, because you're going to drive me nuts. And so I just started to write, and I really didn't know what I was doing. I had always wanted to write a novel, and I thought that's what it was going to be. I thought it was going to be literally a standalone. And then I shared this with a couple of my friends that were in the writing business, one who was a professor, another who was an author. And they both advised me that usually, and I should have known this from being an avid reader, but most successful fantasy stories are not standalone novels. They're series.
Right.
And in part, it's because, folks like me, and it sounds like, you and many of your followers, all love this stuff. When you build a world, like I've built the world of Realm of Warminster, they don't want to see it go away at the end of one novel. They want to live in it, and they want to be immersed in it. And that's what I've done. I've taken what I thought was going to be a standalone novel of about 600 pages and pulled it into 4 books in what will likely be the first series of the Realm of Warminster. And so, I've gotten some coaching on that from my publisher. I've gotten some coaching on that from my editors and folks that know the business a little bit better than I do, because I was a neophyte to it. I stepped into it almost as a hobby and a bucket list thing. It's like, hey, I wanted to do this. I think I got this great story. Here it is. And they said, you know what, this is really good, but it could be better, and let us show you how to make it better. And so it was a condition from my publisher that it wouldn't be a standalone. She said, I'll publish this, but it's got to be a series. And it started to be 3, and now it's up to book 4. But I swear book 4 will end the first series, and we'll see what happens after that. I've got some ideas about some origin stories for some of the characters that I've gotten really strong feedback about from readers and folks that I've met at conventions and book signings and things like that, about characters that they like and characters that they like to hate, and learning a little bit more about their backgrounds too. And that part's going to be fun, because at that point, you can revisit some of these things that you don't know about some of the characters as you read them. And now I get a chance to kind of reveal the history and what brought them to where they are in the book, and why you might love them or why you might hate them.
I think that is interesting, seeing like the reveal of the backstories of villains. And it's one of those things I think that fantasy game players and fantasy lovers have always enjoyed. They want there to be a lot more history and story behind the villain than just, oh, he's a bad guy. And I think it's really cool to see, like, Disney has done their whole villain series, and they're going back and kind of giving you a precursor to, why did Maleficent become like this, and and things like that. I think that is something that people avidly want to know, is how did people become the dark person or monster that they eventually end up being.
Yeah. And I think that comes down to a number of good points, right? So in part, people aren't born just naturally great and good or evil, right? You want to know the story behind where they got to where they were. And sometimes that's choices, things that they did that maybe they thought were going to be the lesser of two evils, or something they did because it was going to be for a greater good, and it turned out to be reversed on them. And then when things like that have a tendency to get their own momentum, it's really hard to change them. And they are seminal moments in your life. There are things that will, definitely be a fork in the road. And so when you get to learn about these characters in the background, it makes them more real. And in fantasy, as stupid as it sounds, you're already asking someone to suspend their disbelief when they're reading your stuff. So you have to have enough real things in a novel or in a movie or a TV show that make the characters believable. And fault is a belief. Everybody's made mistakes, and some of them you can overcome. You can't have perfect characters. And I think that we've seen a lot of that change. Like people cheer for Han Solo. He's clearly not a perfect character. They cheer for Boba Fett is equally, I had someone call in Canistry Waits, one of my villains. She said, please, I got this, note from a reader, and she's like, please don't kill in Canistry Waite. He's my favorite character. He's your Boba Fett. And at that point, you don't think about that. And you're like, oh, and then there's this entire backstory that I know as a writer that you don't know as a reader, and you're just reading about this assassin, and you think, all right, well, this guy's, he might be, this evil guy. I got to cheer against him, and oh, is he wickedly bad? But then you start thinking, how did he get that way, and what happened, and his backstory is a big part of book 3, and so you'll read about that in the prologue of book 3, where some of the others like Great Taurus you need to find out about as we lurch along, and the von Lormark family you'll find out about in origin stories and things like that too. So it's I love the idea of it. It's future content, and it's stuff that I've been told by my readers that they would consume, they would read. So I think that's a good sign for the series itself.
Are there any authors that growing up that you sort of would liken yourself to, or anybody who really inspired the way that you write?
Oh yeah. So clearly, I think Tolkien is the granddaddy of them all, right? He's the first, and will always be there with Lord of the Rings and the Hobbit. But if I had to admit, more contemporary writers are my favorites. I love Margaret Weiss and Dragonlance, and that of course has D&D roots. The Hickmans with Ravenloft. And, my favorite is R.A. Salvatore with the Dark Elf trilogy. And that, of course, is D&D all over. It's Forgotten Realms and Drizzt and all the stuff that goes along with that. And maybe it's my love of the game that makes me rank them higher than the Robert Jordans and the Brandon Sandersons and the Martins of the world. And nothing against them. I think their stuff is great, but because it's not related to something I've been immersed in for 20 years, it's easier for me to like some of this other stuff because I can see it. And like you said earlier in the conversation, as a player or as a DM, you can see yourself in these roles, and you kind of guessed ahead of time that some of them were D&D characters that are now made into fictional characters in a novel.
Well, I think you definitely hit the nail on the head with like the Forgotten Realms and the R.A. Salvatore. There is something about reading a story in a world that you've been involved in that sort of kind of jumps you immediately right into it because you've already had an immersion into that world. And then I think with your story, what makes it so easy is it does remind me of sort of like the, especially there at the beginning, I'm like, oh, this reminds me of starting a campaign. It feels like the coming together of these character backstories that are drawing the adventuring party together. And so it has that feel for me that is familiar and immediately draws me into something that a process that I've loved for so long in my life that it just, sort of feels like home in a way to speak.
Yeah. And I think you nailed it on the head. I mean, and you can see it coming together in novel 1, right? And everybody, you've got the rogue with Fox Dalden, you've got the ranger with Sir Ritter, you've got the sorceress with Adeline, and with Damus, you've got this sort of like priestly cleric fumbling guy who doesn't know all of his powers yet, and gets a chance to learn them on the fly with, I think a group of folks that I've pulled together. And of course, I've borrowed names from old characters, whether they're mine or my players. I've done that. It's scenarios where we've literally played some of the things that happened, and some went well and some didn't go so well in gameplay. But, you have the creative license to do whatever you want as an author to make the best story that you can. And you can see, choices that they make and how they don't always go right. And it reminds you of just being in a D&D campaign or in any kind of a, role-playing setting. The DM's supposed to challenge you. And, in this case, you can almost guess where the inflection points were. It's some of those campaigns because you see them in here. You're like, I know what happened there. I know someone rolled a 1, or a 20 for that matter. So like, and that kind of stuff, I think it helped. And I like the idea of my friends and family picking up the novels and reading them and seeing their characters reflected in it. And some of them have been really twisted and some of them have been changed, but for the most part, they kind of stay consistent. And I'm able to use them as characters, but they feel more real than just any kind of stand-in that you would write in, and you can call them back at the right moments as an author, and people will remember them because you made them more memorable.
Well, I think that is such a beautiful thing about drawing from that sort of real life experience that you've had, is because as one individual, be it a dungeon master or whatever, you can give life to NPCs, but if you're drawing from player characters that other people have really given life to, I think there's just so much more there to draw from, because there is so much more than one person can do when you sort of have this collaborative storytelling. And even though you're the one telling the story in this, when it comes from that, many minds are making light work, so to speak.
Right.
So that, yeah, it's really beautiful. Let me ask you, if your books ever became movies, what actors or actresses would you see for the main characters?
Well, in truth, my wife and her friends have that figured out already. I have no idea how they do it. It literally has been a conversation over several beers and several lunches with a variety of people. And of course, they're not the same people I would choose. So,
Interesting.
yeah, for me, there's a few that really stand out to me as I think, kind of like winners here. I think that if you remember the original Highlander movie, with Clancy Brown playing the Kurgan, I see him as von Lormark. So like in my head, when I'm writing him, I literally see Clancy Brown in his armor with his his double-bladed sword. And that is Dragich von Lormark. I mean, all the way, like I can see that happening.
Awesome.
Even though he's a little older, the salt and pepper hair, I think is a perfect age for von Lormark, like an aged, like Myrmidon, this veteran guy that, you don't want to face on the battlefield kind of thing. I think that he for sure. And then a few other, like for me, I can see like, it's hard to pitch Adeline as anything because, I don't think she's like this alabaster skin with this crimson eyes,
Mm-hmm.
crimson hair. And for me, it's hard to find an actress that would fit because you literally have to get them in makeup to see,
Right.
Who they might be. But if she was a little younger, I would say Kate Beckinsale. I think she would be, a perfect fit, sort of, she has those elven features. She's also an action hero in many movies, especially a lot of vampire movies, which I'm addicted to. So, I think, she might fit pretty well into that kind of role. And Damus, there's a young actor named Jaden Martell that I saw when he was, in his puberty years. He played in the first It movie. And the most recent movie he did was Metal Lords, which was done by the Game of Thrones guys from HBO. They made this movie about these kids that fall in love with heavy metal, and I can just see him as sort of this young, in that he's like high school age, which is exactly where Damus is. Damus is in that 18, 19, 20-year-old range where, he's no longer a child, but he's yet to become a man and he's growing into his power. And someone like Jaden, I think, really kind of fits the bill for that. He's serious enough. He has that kind of nerdy look that I want for Damus, with floppy hair and, this sort of timid look like he had in the remake of It. But I also think he's somebody that can act well and, kind of step up and be in that. Now, if you ask my wife, she'd give me a slate of completely different actors, all of which have the last name of Hemsworth or something.
Oh,
like
yeah,
that.
there you go. Exactly.
I lose control of it at that point. And of course,
that's what my wife would probably cast too. So
we've got, it's a $200 million budget for actors alone without any CGI at all. And here, so, but I think those are the places I would go immediately, and then I'd have to be, I guess I'd have to give it some deeper thought on some others.
It's interesting. Yeah, as I've been reading, and I was considering that question for Adeline, the one that I keep picturing, maybe because of the hair, is Sadie Sink, who played in this Stranger Things.
Yeah, I think
recently.
Yeah, for her, first of all, she did an excellent job in the most recent.
Yes.
That was like stealing for someone who was I don't want to say a sidebar character until now.
But it really kind of was a background character. Yeah.
And now in this one, she basically took over the last season. And really did well. And there's the iconic kind of look to her floating up above the graveyard. And I've seen that so many times. And I think that's something that people won't forget. I think she would be really, really good at something like that. Especially, of course, it doesn't hurt that she has red hair too. So,
but exactly, yeah. And I think that's probably what draws me to it, is she kind of has the look already that I'm picturing as I read the description of the character.
Yep. I bet she does.
Awesome. So, tell me one more thing in your artistic process. What do you find the most difficult, and what do you find the most easy as you're writing?
So, the most difficult for me is oftentimes and I've got a couple of workarounds for this, is every author has writer's block. And what I've found is it's hard to overcome that on your own. And my workarounds are, I've got 7 guys I play Dungeons and Dragons with every Sunday night or most Sunday nights. And they're all super creative, and none of them are authors in their own right, but they all are, guys that I can use as a group that I can bounce ideas off of. And, if you're a player of any role-playing game, you know that to be true. I mean, when your group gets stuck and, there's a break in the action, you got a couple of days for your next session, you talk about it and you're like, what are we going to do? What are our characters going to do? What do you have? What magic items you have available, or what spells do you have left, or how many hit points you've got? And you figure out ways and strategies and tactics that will win. Yep. And I use them as sort of like my creative counsel, and I go to them and bounce ideas off of them until my writer's block is gone. And I think the second part of that is oftentimes when you think you've written something well and you share it with a group of people and then you don't get the response you expected. Like everybody's like, I didn't get this or whatever. And so in the business, it's called beta readers. And you find people that understand your genre, who have done a lot of reading. Hopefully some of them have been writers and editors, and they'll go through and point out plot holes or things that could have been better. They'll throw ideas at you. And then, as long as you have the thick enough skin to take that constructive criticism back, you could do that and use that as a tool, right? You kind of sharpen it and go back and back into the lab and pound something out that's a better novel. And I can give you example of that from just the first 2 books, and the third one I'm in the process of finishing now. And then the easiest thing for me, as stupid as this is going to sound, is plotting. I think that my years as being a dungeon master or game master, I've always thought about this great sort of like end of a series, and then I work back to the beginning of it. And, and then as a good game master, you have to pace those things. So the characters, they don't find everything out about the bad guys right away or what their big challenges are. They have to slowly but surely get there. And I think that makes for a better story. So for me, even though I think a lot of people struggle with that, especially there's a group of people in my business called pantsers. And these are people that write by the seat of their pants, hence pantsers. And they can get any idea and write 10 chapters on it. I can't do that. I literally have to plot everything out. And I think it's that process that makes me able to write what I'm going to write, especially for epic fantasy. Because if you read Tolkien or Martin or any of these epic fantasy writers, they have histories and monetary systems and magic systems and religious, systems that all are baked in. And half of the people that they mention, you never meet, like in Lord of the Rings, Isildur was already dead. So like he's already gone, but you know who he was. He's a very important character by name. And so I've created family trees. I've created maps. I've done things that allow my readers to follow along by going through my websites or picking up in these, in the various books, different things, so they can follow along stuff and get the same kind of like epic feel to it as part of that. And so for me, I think the easiest part has always been the planning because of 20 years of being a DM.
Yeah, I think that's something that I do, especially when I'm creating a D&D campaign. I work in the same way. I mentioned it in my book, Session Zero. I always come up with what's the big ending going to be, and then build backwards. Where do they end? Where do they start? And then I sort of fill in the pieces in between, and in almost the exact same kind of micro scale. Then, okay, Adventure 1, where is it in? Here's where they start. Adventure 2, now they get to the end of Adventure 1, so that's where they start. So it's kind of,
I need them to be leveled up by this point to fight this guy.
Yep.
Yeah, right. So it's exactly the same thing.
Which is great, which means for my dungeon masters out there who are listening, it could give them some hope if they want to sit down and write a novel. The process that you're using as a DM can be very beneficial when it comes to writing a story. I mean, that's what you're doing. So why not put more pen to paper?
Yep. One you're writing, the other you're telling.
Exactly. Yep. All right. Well, let's move into tricks of the trade. In today's tricks of the trade, I have asked Joe to give us a few ideas of how to move from writing stories for a campaign to becoming an author. So go ahead and take it away, Joe.
I think that there's a few things that I use And this could be for a novice author or anybody who's never been through this before. I think the hardest part about becoming an author for me was writing every day and getting used to writing. And for me, I have a day job, right? I own a couple of businesses. So it was really hard for me to commit to that during my life pre-COVID. And then when COVID happened, everything kind of ground to a stop, and that allowed me to dedicate that time. And now when I don't write, I feel like I'm missing the gym, like my body's telling me something. It's like, oh, you just wasted 4 hours. You know what I mean? Like, you could have been writing something. And when I say write, I'm not talking about pounding out 3-4 chapters. I'm thinking outlining the next section, an idea for a new book, taking notes, doing research, things that make you're advancing the overall product. And it doesn't have to be straight up writing. But I do find that once you get disciplined and feel that you will miss it if you don't get it. It's like not going to the gym on a holiday. You're like, oh, I just feel weird. Like I should be there. And I think that, that's something that I've learned. I've also learned, I mentioned this just a little bit earlier, but I'll underscore it here, is don't be afraid to share your work. In part, I think a lot of folks are afraid of opening the door. And I think many writers are introverts by nature. Now, I am not one. So, I think that letting someone into the dark recesses of your mind and picking away at a story, whether or not they like it or not, can be intimidating, but it's the right thing to do to get your book in the best state it can be. And I'll give you an example. I mean, if you're a fan of movies, they will show alternate endings in theaters to crowds and ask them which one they like best. Or if you're a marketing person, you'll go in, you'll sit behind a see-through window, a mirror, and listen to a focus group, and they'll tell you, what product they like better and why. And you'll be able to do that. And they, and the people that are telling you that are only telling you that so that you can make the right choices on your product. And in this case, your book is the product, and you're not always going to write something that's 100%. And so for someone to say, this doesn't make sense, or why did they do that? Or I missed that. That's the worst, where it's like, you thought you wrote something in that was very, very important to the plot. And then a group of people come back and say, it grazed over me. I didn't even catch it. And then, you got to go back and tweak that. So use that as a tool in your tool chest as well. Make sure that, you've got a chance to show this to people that you trust, their opinion. Not, you can't be your mom who's always going to love everything you do.
Right.
It's got to be someone who's going to tell you truthfully, hey, this is where I think this can be improved. And this is what I really like. And let's see more of that.
Yeah, I think for me, that is something that became especially true when I put out my book and then the podcast right after that. And it was also sort of like a pandemic project. One thing about the pandemic that was great is it brought so much more creativity out of people that they, I think, were always waiting to have the time to be able to do.
So
and
true.
It was the same for me. Like I was still working, yes, but there were moments where the family was home. I had a lot more time to sit in front of my computer and really pour out a lot of those things that I had thought, one day when I get enough time, I'm going to do this. And then all of a sudden, so many people had the time to do all those things they said they were going to do, which was great. I think the creativity that I've seen in this community, especially of D&D players and fantasy, has been enormous in the last 2 years. There have been so many new great stories, so many new great podcasts, and just beautiful worlds being created by people that they always wanted to do and now finally had the opportunity.
Yeah. I mean, and if there's a silver lining in a pandemic, that was it for many of us. Right. And I'm glad that we share some sort of a connection with that. I mean, you were doing the same thing I was doing, and it was a matter of having the time to sit down and do something that you were afraid to do part-time. And then now it's turned into its own business for me. You have to be successful commercially. You've got to do, it's just not putting out a book and twiddling your thumbs and hoping it gets bought. Now you've got to market it.
Yeah.
And so me coming on shows like this and talking to folks and finding connections with them, or, using social media, as part of that. I mean, it's free advertising, or finding ways to get yourself in front of readers, and they can't be your family again. They've got to be people that read your stuff. So, as much as I love the fact that my mother and my uncle and my niece and nephew bought the book, I know they bought it because of me. What I really need are folks that play Dungeons and Dragons, or like Star Wars and Star Trek, or have watched, the Ring of Power or are going to go see the next Marvel movie. That is my target audience. I need them to go and buy my book or download the audiobook and listen to it.
I kind of went through a similar experience when I got my book out there, which came before the podcast. It was out, it was available, but nobody was buying it. And I kind of thought to myself, well, I might need to do something more to market this and let people know that it's out there, because there are so many great books out there. There's so much content and endless supply, more than one person could ever read. So that's kind of where my podcast came out. And that really has kind of been the driver and the motivating factor to get more sales of my story. And you're right, just getting the word out and getting in front of people that can hear about it is such an important part.
Yep.
So just right before we leave, before I let you plug yourself and and where everybody can find all your stuff, do you have any final piece of advice that you would give to especially dungeon masters who want to turn their stories into a fantasy novel? Where would you say they need to start? What would the first step be for them?
Yeah, so as a player and a dungeon master, I know that you have your favorite adventure of all time. And it's likely your favorite adventure of all time because everybody in the group had a great time playing it. And they're going to say it was their favorite too. My wife laughs at us at like holiday parties and stuff where we're sitting around chatting and talking about characters that we played that aren't even real, but the experiences are so real to us. It's like this group delusion that we've all had. And the girls are all sitting there laughing at us geeks, talking about how this character died or this person did that, or there's a sphere of annihilation and whatever, right? And they don't know what any of that is, and they don't care, and they find it funny. But the truth is, it's an experience, and you're almost reminiscing on that favorite moment. Take those favorite moments and create a story out of them. And I'd also say, don't wait. I wasted 20 years of my life not doing this. I can't imagine a day that goes by where I'm not doing this now. This is so much fun. And even though I've got to keep up, with, the bills and the businesses and the stuff that I'm doing, I need to make sure that I make money for my family and provide. But this thing has become more than a hobby. It's become, part of a lifestyle. And as an author, it's really cool to tell people about what you're doing, and you get energy. You can just feel the energy coming off of people when you see them at bookstores, or they come out to a convention, or you see them at some geekathon or nerdathon. You'll run into these people, and they will. You could be at your Magic the Gathering playing thing, and then you tell them you're an author, and you baked into some of your. They're all going to want to read it, and so I would take the best of the best and use them, and don't wait. Don't let them get stale. Memorializing the memories of those adventures into a novel, or at least some notes so you'll remember them. Is what I would say for everybody to start.
That I think is very excellent advice. And honestly, even just as you're talking about it, I can think of a couple of my stories that immediately jump out as this would be very good if it was turned into a story, because they're the ones that everybody still talks about.
Yeah.
And I think that's the thing that really kind of is the key thing to look for, is if you're, for me, 10, 15, 20 years away from a story and everybody's still talking about it, that was a great story.
It was. And those are the ones that need to be memorialized in a book.
Awesome. So let the listeners know, where can they find your stuff? Can they get a hold of your books? How can they get in contact with you? Anything else you want to share?
Yeah. So www.jvhilliard, HILLIARD, will put you on my website. Also, JV Hilliard Books will find me on Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, and JV Hilliard. You can find me on Facebook there. I also have a Discord under JV Hilliard. My books are available pretty ubiquitously. You can find them at dragonmoonpress.com, which is my publisher. Or, if you're the kind that want to buy it from Amazon or Rakuten or Apple Books or Barnes & Noble, you can find it available there. It's available in paperbacks, ebooks, and of course, audio.
And I will put links to all of those locations in the session notes so that listeners, you can find that and get in contact, get these books in your hands. They're very good stories, by the way. So please take the opportunity, buy one of these stories, start with the first one. It'll hook you right away. If you love D&D, you're going to be hooked right away. I can tell you all that much. So please support this author. Thank you so much for being on the show today. I do want to remind my listeners that the next episode is going to be our season 1 finale. we're going to be taking a break through the end of the year and coming back at the beginning of the new year with season 2, reformatting the show a little bit and having some great new interviews and stories to tell you along the way. So again, Joe, thank you so much for being here with me today. I really appreciate it.
It's been my pleasure. Thank you very much for having me.
And until next time, listeners, we will see you next session.